Lifestyle Solutions, the podcast, is here to give the Christian wife real talk about marriage, self-improvement, self-care, and more through relatable experiences and practical solutions for maintaining the role of wife as God designed, because wife is more than a title, it's a lifestyle. I'm your host, Ashley Smith. Let's get into this week's episode. Hey, Wife Tribe. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Lifestyle Solutions, the podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Smith, and let's get into this week's episode. The title of today's episode is What's Your Wife Story? So I want to talk to you a little bit about who I am and how I came to be the wife that I am today, and how the story of Lifestyle Solutions has evolved. So my wife story, growing up, I always wanted to be a wife, and watching my parents interact in their marriage, I knew that I wanted to be a wife. I knew that I wanted to be a mother. I knew that I wanted to have a family, and I wanted that within the construct of marriage. So growing up and watching my parents' marriage, I really understood the idea of, or the vow, for better or for worse. My parents, we went through some challenges. One of the biggest that really stands out in my mind is when my dad was working. One day he worked in a factory, and he was a forklift operator, and he was thrown off of a forklift, and that caused a back injury, which prevented him from being able to work. So during that time of him recovering and him not being able to work, my mother really held it down and held it together. And through that ordeal, that really just showed me kind of the dedication that a wife really has to her husband when it's not easy, being, now shifting to being the sole financial provider for a family. I'm sure it was really challenging, at times for her, but she did it with such grace, and she never complained. Not that, of course, I knew about. So in my mind, that's just what wives did. If your husband needs you, you're there, and that's just what it is. Growing up, I have two siblings, an older sister and a younger brother. And throughout our childhood, everything seemed like we had the kind of the perfect little family. But that was kind of shaken when my parents told us that they would be getting a divorce. So by this time we were adults, and it seemed like, okay, you're grown. It kind of doesn't matter if your parents get divorced. But it really did have a great impact on us. So, and their divorce was final on their 30th wedding anniversary, ironically. So they were married for exactly 30 years. But what that taught me was that I didn't want to leave a legacy of divorce for my children. So at the time when they did divorce, I was still unmarried. I hadn't met my husband yet. And for a short time, I thought maybe that it would change my viewpoint of marriage and what I wanted it to be, or if I even wanted to still get married. But, my desires and my passions about, being a wife and a mother didn't change. The only thing that changed was that I wanted to try to make sure that I got married one time and that my marriage would last. And, there's no guarantees, but what I wanted to do, I asked God, like, I really want someone who loves you and honors you first. Because the last thing I want to do is have to pray my husband into church and into loving you. And I knew that if my husband loved God then he could lead me and I'd be comfortable following him. So the divorce happens, and that kind of changed me a little bit, but I want to kind of go back some too. So my parents' divorce was final in 2011, but I want to tell you about kind of how I became the wife that I am. So I'll tell you how my husband and I met. So James and I are both educators, and we began our teaching careers in 2009. And we met at a new teacher orientation seminar. So we were in groups and we were, engaged in the seminar, and someone was asked to participate, and he stood up and he introduced himself. And I saw him and I was like, "Ooh, he's really cute." So I was talking to a friend and I told her, I was like, "I'm going to talk to him today." So he mentioned that he was from Buffalo, New York. So I said, okay, that's my way to kind of start a conversation. So at the end of the day, I walked up to him and I said, "Hey," introduced myself and said, "So I heard that you're from Buffalo. My family is from Niagara Falls." So that led into this, discussion of kind of how God worked extra hard to get us together. So my husband, he's from Buffalo, but he also spent a great deal of his childhood growing up in Niagara Falls, New York. They're about 25-30 minutes apart. So Niagara Falls is the city where my parents were born and raised. That's the city where my grandparents live. It's the city where his parents were born and raised, his grandparents live. So in this discussion, we discovered he had gone to high school with most of my cousins. He knew my family. Our grandmothers had been best friends at, some point in their lives. His mom and my parents had gone to elementary school together, graduated high school together. His church that he grew up in Niagara Falls, I could see it from my grandmother's doorstep, from her front yard. I can see the church he grew up in. But the funny thing is that we never met. And all the summers that I spent up there and the time that I spent there, I never knew him or his family. But somehow God brought him all the way to Georgia to somehow meet me. So after this conversation, we exchanged numbers and we went out on a couple of dates, and we kind of decided that, it's cool, but it's not really going to work right now. James was just getting to Atlanta, so I could understand coming to a new city. He didn't want to be tied down to anybody right away. So I said, "Hey, no problem. Good deal. We can part ways, be friends." And somehow my cocky self told him that he wasn't going to like anybody as much as he liked me. So yikes, there's that, Ashley, for boldness. But we maintained our friendship, and through the years we would message each other on Facebook or text message, just to check in, see how things were going with teaching. And when I was turning 25 for my birthday, I had just joined a new church, and I decided I was inviting all of my Facebook friends to church with me for my birthday, because I said that's, I love my church, I love Jesus, and I just want everybody to come to church with me for my birthday. So James was one of the people that showed up that day. So that was really sweet, and it really meant a lot to me. But like I said, we were just friends. So he came to church. We said, hey, the church happened to be a few minutes from where he was living at the time. So he did. He came back, he visited, and then a couple months later, he joined as well. So we're both at the same church. We're serving, we're engaged with being really involved with our different ministry areas. And it was just okay. We had really friend zoned each other. It was just, we're solely friends and that's it. And I remember one day we had like some friends and family thing or something at church, and he brought some woman to church with him, y'all. And I was like, what is she doing here? I kind of felt the way, y'all. So at that point, I kind of knew that things were shifting between us. He had, one day my car broke down and I needed a ride to church, and he was driving from Atlanta. Our church was in, goodness, Lilburn. So that was a nice drive, and he had already passed my exit. So I was like, okay, I hope he'll come back and pick me up. I'm not sure. But he did. He was a gentleman. He came back, he picked me up, took us to church. After church, he came, he gave my car a jump. And it was just like little things like that over this short period of time that I found myself really trusting him as my friend. And we decided at some point that we wanted to really commit ourselves to each other again. So here we are. We got married in June of 2013. We now have 2 beautiful children, James the 4th and Ashari. James is 6 and Ashari is 2. They are so amazing. And yeah, life it's good. I'm very grateful that God brought us together. It was definitely, after all of that, unexpected. But I'm grateful because I know that God made my husband just for me. So it makes it easier to go through the tough days, the not so easy days, the not so easy times, and knowing that, God made us for each other, and no matter what, we can figure out a way to make this work. So that brings me to the road to Wifestyle Solutions. How did that come about? So we got married in 2013. Our church started what's known more widely as small groups, so we call them connect groups. And because I love books, I had read this book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And I said, I want to lead a connect group around the 5 love languages designed for couples. So in our little apartment, I led this group, and I really enjoyed engaging with couples and really helping us all to kind of talk through different situations and scenarios and helping us to become better spouses for each other. So fast forward to 2017, I decided to lead another group. This time I wanted to focus on the wives. So another book, but this time we read the book, The Power of a Praying Wife by Stormy O'Martin. And this group, I led it with my sister and another great friend. And this group was so amazing. We learned so much over the course of, I think it was about 8 weeks. And it really helped us to kind of self-reflect, and in praying for our husbands, help us to understand how, we can't neglect ourselves in doing that. So later in the year of 2017, God gave me the vision for what at the time I envisioned as, the title was Wifestyle. And I was like, Lord, what in the world is this? Like, what do you want it to be? He just told me I needed to do something for wives. So I'm like, okay. I kind of just sat on it for a while because I didn't really know exactly what I wanted it to be. But 2020, at the beginning of the year, God told me to start a podcast. And I was like, haha, you're funny. That's not gonna happen. I don't like talking to people. I don't listen to podcasts. Like, what am I going to talk about? So I kind of tried to do all these other little things to distract me from the podcast. So I started a Facebook community. I gathered some wives together and we engaged in the group and talk. And it was kind of like, yeah, this podcast is not going to go away, Ashley, so you can keep running if you want to, but you're going to have to answer the call at some point. So I kind of researched a little bit about podcasts, and I was just like, this is really overwhelming. I don't know what to do, how to really get started. There's an amazing young lady. Her name is Mary Lee Vance at my church, who leads a podcast, Virtue with Vision. And she also started what's called Pods in Excellence, helping other people to start their own podcast. So I kind of waited around and didn't really join. So in the meantime, I said, okay, well, I'll write a book. So 2021, I wrote an ebook. It's called The Key to Peace in Your Marriage. I released that early 2022, and the opportunity again came for me to join Pods in Excellence. So I said, okay, I'm just going to take the leap and do it. So Mary has been instrumental in helping me to get started. But the time is now. So I'm not running anymore. Here I am. I don't know all that God has in store for Lifestyle Solutions, the podcast. But what I do know is that if he's leading me and this is what he has told me to do, then he's going to equip me to give you exactly what you need. This is all for his glory. It's not about me. I kind of feel like I'm unqualified and I don't have all the answers, but it's not really about me having all the answers. It's about me being a willing vessel and allowing God to speak through me to encourage you to be the best possible wife that you can be for your husband. No, we're not perfect, but God doesn't call us to be perfect. He just wants us to be excellent. The Bible says an excellent wife is the crown of her husband. So I really believe that we can be excellent wives if we follow God's blueprint for marriage and how wives should lead their lives. And it may not be easy, but we can get the job done. I truly want every wife who's married now, I want wives to stay married. I want couples to stay together. The enemy tries so hard to attack marriages and to, he does the sneakiest things to derail you and to make you feel like, divorce is an option. And if you take divorce off the table, then you really commit to doing the work, to making your marriage work. So I want to help you to do that. Being a wife is not just something that I take lightly. It really is an essential part of who I am. So join me for this ride in learning how to be a wife, because wife is more than a title. It's a lifestyle. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Lifestyle Solutions, the podcast, and I will see you soon. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Lifestyle Solutions, the podcast. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Lifestyle Solutions for more inspiration and more solutions. As always, subscribe to the show to catch every new episode and leave us a review so we can continue to bring you fresh content about how to live your lifestyle God's way, because wife is more than a title, it's a lifestyle. See you next week.